much like last year's book, it's based off of a historical fiction. Last year I wrote it on World War II. This year I actually drew it closer to home in my calling and wrote it more on the history of law enforcement. I wrote a collection of first-hand accounts of important events in law enforcement history that have shaped it into what it is today, starting all the way back to the 19th century. I took all of these events, researched them, wrote them as accurately as possible, and wrote them from the first-hand accounts of someone involved in the events at the time, from the eyes of that person in that event. I entitled it Officer Down. And in this book, I specifically took 4 events from law enforcement history that I thought that were most influential into how our law enforcement is shaped today. My book contains historical fiction accounts of the Haymarket riot, the Milwaukee police station bombing, the Newhall incident, and 9/11. So in simpler words, I wrote a book. To any of you that were part of last year's 40-hour project, I wrote this book, which is called Into the Dark. This was my first success at writing a finished book, and I kind of springboard off the success of that and wrote this one this year. My book relates to modernity in that the events taken from it are from the era of modernity. The oldest event I write about is the Haymarket riot, which happened in 1886. From there, my next story centers around the Milwaukee police station bombing, which took place in 1970. Following suit, I have the Newhall shooting, which happened in 1970, and the last one is 9/11, which happened in 2001. While doing my research on the history of law enforcement and where we've come in terms of protecting and serving, those 4 events really stuck out to me as crucial to our police force today. Where we've come from, what we are now, and where it's going. Like last year's 40-hour project, the majority of my time was spent writing, doing research on law enforcement, creating and binding my writing into the cover, and not only that, but it's very difficult to accurately portray an event through the eyes of someone you never met. And that was something I kind of struggled with, was to try to get it as accurately as possible from the eyes of the law enforcement officer I was portraying it through. Law enforcement stretches back all the way to the founding of America with the Watchmen. There was 9 men stationed to guard the settlements that were started in America all the way back when it was founded. Now, granted, I didn't write all the way back then. That's a little out of modernity. But during my research for everything, I got to see a broad picture of law enforcement dating all the way back then, and how it's changed since then. Some good, some bad. But I learned a lot of valuable history that I will definitely hang on to for the rest of my life. At the end of our 40-hour projects, our teachers want us to come up with a moral philosophy or a so what, or why does this matter conclusion. And unlike my project last year, I actually figured mine out before I even started my project. I was struck with a moral philosophy that I wanted to gain a deeper understanding of the career that God is calling me into. And so this obsessive desire to research where it started from was sparked, and suddenly I'd become like Emma with her 45 tabs in her Internet Explorer browser. But like I said earlier, I researched high and low, and from the very beginning of law enforcement in America to today's modern police force. All of this researching and learning is going to help me be a better police officer someday. One of the things Dr. Grant is always hammering into his students is that the purpose of recording history and looking back on history is to study it and learn from those mistakes that were made back then so we don't make the same mistakes today or in the future. It's a record of events. The purpose of my book this year is just that. It's a record of events, very important events events that happen in law enforcement to look back on and see the mistakes so that we don't make them again. Writing an account of these events has helped me see the mistakes and the problems of these times, and hopefully equips me with better understanding to not make them myself in my own career, and hopefully protect me and the people I work with. So I'm going to read a little part of my book really quick. Dispatch, 1201, there's been a 1080 at the North Twin Tower. 1199, I need assistance, Carol shouted into the radio on her shoulder as she ran towards the Twin Towers. Men and women ran by, pointing towards the towers, yelling, that way, as they headed in the opposite direction. Carol pushed past screaming people and ran around stopped cars, her heavy boots propelling her towards the closest tower, the South Tower. Sirens blared off in the distance, and the echo of the explosion still reverberated through the loud streets of New York. The familiar drone of people going to and fro along the streets had suddenly been replaced by screams, sirens, and car alarms. But Carol's focus was only on the tail of a plane jutting out from the side of the North Twin Tower, through the fingers of fire crawling up the side of the building, and the smoke, black as coal, pouring out of the gaping hole. Her eyes watched the rain of debris falling from the top towers of the North Tower as she reached the entrance to the South Tower. Get out of the area, head uptown, Carol shouted through the chaos of the flood of people pouring out of the front doors. Businessmen and women curved around her like a stream of water around a rock as she repeated her message to all that could hear, while motioning in the direction they should go. A minute later, several officers joined her, motioning the people away from the tower while shouting instructions back and forth. We've got to get inside and evacuate from the lower level up, shouted a large black officer who stood at least 6 feet tall, towering over everyone around him. Carol instantly recognized him as one of the officers who worked uptown. A group of men stopped near Carol, dumbfounded. What's happening? One of them asked, shielding his eyes from the sun while he stared up at the top of the North Tower, now engulfed in smoke and fire. Just keep moving, Carol shouted as she moved the men towards downtown. This area isn't safe. Head uptown. The men started moving, but stopped once more to look again. Carol turned and directed her attention to those that would listen, repeating her message once more. The welcome sight of big red fire engines quickly arrived in a fast, single-file formation, blaring their sirens and shouting through the loudspeakers for people to make way. As soon as the wheels screeched to a halt, dozens of yellow and black-clad firefighters rushed forward and into the lobby of the South Tower.
My 4-year project, my name is Jenkins, graduating class of 2015. My 4-year project was a physical fitness health game, board game, with a trivia in it. I came up with this idea with the help of the idea of Mrs. Fellers. I'm horrible at being creative, so at first I came up with the idea of making foods, but that didn't turn out very well because I would have to research many recipes, and let's just say there weren't very many when I looked. So I started my project off, and I started measuring it before I even had the pieces or the board or anything. I measured before I even had anything. Once I finally got the board, I cut out all the, I had to create all the squares and circles and spots all over on the 1700s and the 1800s, people didn't have to work out and go on diets and be fit or worry about being fit as much as they do now. Just because of all the fast food restaurants and the genetically modified food that we have nowadays. What I learned about it was, the main thing that I learned was looking up all the health facts for the trivia part of the game. Like, just there was tons of different things that I found out about that were health related and physical related stuff. The skill that I found out about me while doing this project was I found out that I'm not very bad with taking measurements. Thought I'd be actually pretty horrible at it, but it's not more enjoyable than I thought it would be. It is related to my calling, I think, by with the measurements and being precise and calculative and stuff with everything, because I want to be a electronics engineer and have that as my career later on. The difficulties of it were, I think, getting everything out on the computer and getting everything the same spacing and same font. I think that was the hardest, just because it would unspace itself. It took some time, especially with 20 pages of 20 pages with three cards on each page of the decks. I figured out how to make a colored deck first before I even had any of the things. Before I had a board or the paper or anything, I first started working on the cards on the computer. I somehow figured out how to make a design that I liked, that worked for me. And later when I came back to it, I couldn't find it again to make another deck. So I spent probably a couple hours just trying to figure out how I got that first deck like it was, and then went from there. It worked well. I enjoyed about it, like I said, the measurements on it. I fairly enjoyed trying to be creative. Was enjoyable, I guess. But yeah, more philosophy of why it matters is back then people didn't need to worry about going on diets and being fed, and how they already were just in their everyday doings. Compared to now, people often worry about being fit and going on diets because they don't own land or farms or any of that very often. So I think that's one of the main things of my project, is staying fit and healthy, being conscious